A key accuser in Diddy's sex trafficking trial faced intense cross-examination today. Mia says the fallen hip-hop mogul abused and raped her, but Diddy's lawyer, Brian Steele, hit back hard with texts, a birthday video, and questions about her past. We're going to break down what she had to say, as well as another witness, and we're going to talk about it all with Law&Crime's reporter Elizabeth Millner, who is inside the courtroom for all of it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, listen up. This is another Law&Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots or were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients were improperly warned about this risk. It's free to check, takes just a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. Okay, so another key witness in the sex trafficking, racketeering, prostitution trial against Sean Diddy Combs faced some very, very tough questioning from his lawyer. We're talking about Mia, testified under a pseudonym. This is alleged victim number 4 in this case. A former assistant to Combs testified that he assaulted her, he abused her, he sexually assaulted her. She faced some very, very tough questioning today from Brian Steele. This is one of Sean Combs' defense counsel. You may remember that he famously represented Young Thug in a very publicized trial. So lots to break down on what happened in today's testimony. For that, I want to bring on Elizabeth Millner, our Law&Crime reporter, who is in that courtroom today. She's been in that courtroom every day for testimony. Elizabeth, so good to see you, as always. Before we even get into the cross-examination of Mia, there was something really interesting that happened at the beginning of the day. There was a different witness, potential witness, and Eddie Garcia. Talk to us about what happened, because he came in before the jury got in, and there was a very important point about whether or not he's going to get some sort of protection to testify, right? We've talked about it before. You know, in these cases, particularly in a racketeering case, if Combs is accused of using assistants and bodyguards and others to commit crimes and conceal them, and he engaged in this pattern of illegal behavior, he's the only one that's a defendant in this case. You wonder if there are people who are going to testify against him for the government and were granted some sort of protection. So who's Eddie Garcia and what happened there, real quick?
Yeah, well, Jesse, Eddie Garcia is not the first witness in this case to get an immunity deal. We saw this kind of same scenario play out when George Kaplan had testified just a couple weeks ago. So Eddie Garcia is brought into the courtroom before the jury comes in, before Mia is brought back to the witness stand. This was something that happened first thing this morning. And so I was thinking to myself, we have to get to his testimony at some point today. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. But as far as when Eddie Garcia, or Mr. Garcia, was on the witness stand today, he comes in, and I was expecting, I don't know, just kind of a little difference of appearance. I was expecting him to kind of come into a suit, but he walked in very casually, walked up to the witness stand, did the usual. And so Maureen Comey was asking him kind of a series of questions on whether or not he was going to invoke his Fifth Amendment right to either plead the Fifth, take a plea, that type of thing. And so he ended up getting that same immunity order, very similar to the way George Kaplan did whenever he was called to testify before that had even happened, and the judge approved it, just very much so like with George Kaplan. And so we can expect that Eddie Garcia will be one of the next witnesses called to testify, possibly sometime tomorrow for sure.
And by the way, he's a supervisor at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles, the site of that infamous alleged beating by Combs of Cassandra Ventura. And you wonder, why does he need this sort of protection? There's been a lot of talk about what happened to the security footage. Was there a cover-up of some kind? Did anyone accept a bribe or not? So it'll be interesting why it seems he wanted to invoke his Fifth Amendment right and needed some sort of protection. But I just thought that was interesting in terms of what we can expect from Mr. Garcia. Okay, so now we have to talk about Mia. Okay, so Mia's back on the stand. She's back being cross-examined by Brian Steele. And the way it began today, she was asked about her resume. What was going on there?
Yeah, it was one of the first things that Brian Steele was asking me about when she returned to the witness stand. Because again, they had a weekend in between the first part of her cross-examination up until now. So I was kind of wondering where the direction would go. Would they find more video clips? Would they find more photos? Would they use that against her? So when Brian Steele was asking Mia on the stand about her resume, I was just kind of like, where is this going? And it seemed like that was the first thing on his mind, because he didn't say anything to the effect of good morning or hi, how are you? How was your weekend? Nothing like that. It was really just like for Brian Steele, get to work, get this cross-examination underway. And so some of the first lines of questioning that he was asking her was, can you tell the jurors where you went to college? She replied, James Madison University. What was your GPA? That was objected to by the government, and that was sustained by the judge. Then she was asked just about her job positionings or job positions after she had graduated from college. She had mentioned that she had did this study abroad program, and then she became an assistant to somebody. And Mia, while on the stand today, was like, yeah, you know, I did that, but I don't necessarily recall what years, because I believed she graduated from college around 2005, 2006, so a good period ago. And then Brian Steele asked her, well, did you compile a resume? You said on your resume that you work well under pressure and you maintain thick skin. And Mia says, I don't remember writing exactly that. And then we see an exhibit photo of Mia's resume. She had a 3.6 GPA, so the defense got that GPA question in one way or another. Then you kind of see just her job experience from January 2006 to September of 2006, where she was working as an executive assistant to somebody else who was not Sean Combs, aka Diddy. And some of the descriptions that she used when describing her job positions were such as cater to celebrity clients and all their studio needs. And then we kind of got into more of her work history as far as working at a place called Pure Chemistry, and even her assistant role while she had worked for the actor Mike Myers. And some of the descriptions under that included kept inventory of all personal possessions and documentation, including passports. And so I was like, okay, I can see kind of where this is going. And then Brian Steele had asked her, well, when you said that you were being held kind of against your will when you were trying to escape from St. Bar's, that Diddy had held onto your passport, and she was explaining, Brian Steele was explaining that essentially everybody's passports were being held, that it wasn't just Mia's passport that was being held, it was everybody who worked within the staff, and most likely the family members whose passports were being held. And Mia replied yes. And then Brian Steele continuing on into her resume about you can take on a responsibility, and Mia responded, true. You're a leader. Mia kind of pauses before answering. She's like, well, I don't know how to necessarily answer that question. And Brian Steele kind of interjects and goes, but you tell others to speak up for themselves. And she responds yes to that answer. And then we see a kind of a close-up of Mia's same resume where she speaks 4 languages, has thick skin. So I think what the defense was kind of trying to imply is that everything she had gone through on the job was just kind of under the umbrella of it just being thick skin, working those long hours, working for days on end, getting the client or whoever you're working for, just everything that they need. And so then we see the defense kind of pass out those same binders again with all their exhibits, the text, the photos, all of that. Right. And the judge kind of issues a warning to the jury, telling them not to flip through those until instructed. And so then we start to get into more text messages from all the times that Mia had left the job, or after she left the job.
And we're going to talk about those because just to put in context why I think it's important they started out this way, what they seem to be really doing is not only trying to strike at her credibility, and we'll get to that in a minute, that she wasn't necessarily abused or sexually assaulted, that her behavior would be inconsistent with that. We'll talk about it. But they seem to be really fighting back against the forced labor allegations. Remember, for racketeering, the prosecution has to prove at least 2 underlying crimes of this pattern of criminal activity. So there's sex trafficking, there's bribery, there's forced labor, there's drug offenses, there's witness tampering, arson, kidnapping. I don't even know if I'm repeating myself, but forced labor seemed to be a common allegation with respect to the assistants and with respect to Mia. So, this idea of this really wasn't the kind of environment you're portraying, and you're used to these kind of environments. You could have spoken up if there really was a problem. You're a leader. That's the way that I saw it, that she wasn't singled out, as you said. So then you get into the text messages, and this is big, right? This is very similar to what we saw with Cassandra Ventura. Cassandra Ventura being used by the prosecution to say she's a victim of a sex trafficker known as Sean Diddy Combs, that this is beyond a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. He was victimizing her. Well, let me show you a bunch of her messages where it seems to say she encouraged freak-offs, she set them up. So now Mia is confronted with all of these text messages. Talk to us about what these messages were.
And it's not even just Cassie who was confronted with her messages even after the fact. We saw it with Deontay Nash. We saw it with Capricorn Clark. And to your point, Jesse, we saw it once again with Mia. So we see some exhibit photos going back to 2018. So this was after Mia was no longer working with Diddy. And so we see it from December 27th of that year, where Mia is telling Diddy, "Merry Christmas. I love you so, so much." Diddy responds 2 days later, "Same to you." Then a week later, Mia responds, "Happy New Year's." And then we see another text exhibit where Mia is talking about how she had nightmares, that she was trapped in an elevator with none other than R. Kelly, and that Diddy had come to her rescue in this dream or nightmare that she had. But then Brian Steele goes into Mia, where he's just like, "You told the jury that this person terrorized you and caused you PTSD. This was the same person who rescued you in this dream you had." And then there was an objection by the government. That objection was sustained by the judge. Then we go into another exhibit. This one, a text from Mia on March 8th of 2019, where Mia tells Diddy, "Sending you all the love in the world," heart emoji. And then Brian Steele, because there was a little more to that text message, but you guys know how it goes. It goes super fast. Sometimes I can't write it all down. But Brian Steele had asked her, "You weren't under Mr. Combs' spell or brainwashed by Mr. Combs then, were you?" And she had explained it was psychological. She was reaching out around this time frame because this was after Kim Porter had passed away. And we all know that Kim Porter used to date Diddy, as well as the two have a few children together. And Mia was explaining that she had felt horrible for Diddy around this time frame, and that he was grieving, and she just felt horrible for him because Kim Porter had passed away. And then Brian Steele is like, "Well, ma'am, this death occurred 5 months earlier." And she responded, "Yes. Why did you continue to reach out?" And Mia responds, "I didn't think 5 months was that soon. I just didn't understand what had happened to me being Mia, until recently." And then we see more text exhibits where we see a New Year's Eve text from 2019. We see a May 14th, 2020 text. So this is 3 years after Mia had left. And Mia had wrote to Diddy, "Puff, my heart is broken about Dre. You are one of the most influential people. I know it's excruciating. I will always be there." We see another text after Chadwick Boseman passed away where Mia had sent a text to Diddy. Diddy responds, "How are you?" and asks for, I guess, tapes of Chadwick Boseman doing an audition for James Brown. And Mia responds that she'll send Diddy this video. And again, this is around the 2020 time frame. So I think the defense was trying to point out, like they were doing with Cassie, like they were doing with Capricorn Clark, and like they were doing with Deontay Nash, is that there was still love there, even though these horrible things had happened to them.
Yeah, look, it's not a clean prosecution, right? So clearly it's what the defense is doing is striking at her credibility. How can you say that he did all these things to you, and yet you can have these glowing remarks to him? And there's an important video that we'll get to a little bit later as well. On the other hand, of course, we know that there was testimony already in this case from Dr. Dawn Hughes, who is this forensic psychologist, that says there's reason victims may stay in touch with their abusers or have a relationship with them or not speak out. Or, in Cassandra Ventura's case, she said that she was raped by Diddy and then had a consensual sexual episode with him. So I wonder if the jury might be wrestling with this. But there was something else that Brian Steele hit upon. And this was the idea, she has no evidence of this, right? She has no videos or text messages of Combs, raging at her or abusing her, right? Or assaulting her. Didn't he get into that?
Yeah, they got into it a number of different times. So, for example, Brian Steele had asked Mia while she was on the stand, "You had capability of carrying around a phone with you. And do you have any recordings of Mr. Combs berating you?" And Mia responds, "No, he wouldn't allow it." "Well, do you have any texts with family or friends about what Mr. Combs had put you through?" Mia had responded, "No, it was all kept a secret." And then I was kind of wondering to myself, just kind of how aggressive was he going to continue to be during this line of questioning? Because it was really kind of coming off that the defense was implying that she was a liar, that she had no evidence, no proof. She had only disclosed these sexual assaults in June of last year, as opposed to shortly after when Cassie had filed her lawsuit, or even before that. And so I think the defense, in just a number of different ways, was really trying to kind of hone in on the idea that she didn't have photos or evidence of the bruising, even it was with Diddy slamming her arm into the door. She didn't have text messages corroborating her story as far as being like, "Oh, Diddy or Puffy had done this to me on this day. And just, I think they were trying to use her lack of documenting this type of evidence down in a way. But to me, and again, Jesse, it's because quite frankly, we work in this capacity where we see this type of case kind of often, where it's like, why don't alleged victims disclose? Why don't they come forward? Mia was even asked on the stand, why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you make a police report? Why didn't you go through a third party to make a police report? And I just felt like during that line of questioning, it kind of made it seem like, okay, she's not a perfect victim to the defense. That's what it felt like. That's what it seemed like. But to them, I think they did, a job where they had to attack her credibility. I mean, this was someone who had worked closely with Diddy for a number of years. This was someone who also is best friends with Cassie, even to this day. And so I think there were times where, as opposed to Cassie, who had taken photos and there were just other corroborating evidence to kind of support her claims, I felt like with Mia, the defense was trying to paint it as she didn't have any of that. She doesn't have text. She doesn't have photos. She doesn't have videos. All that they did was kind of throw at her these texts of her just wishing Diddy well and saying happy birthday and that she loves him and that type of thing.
And I'll get back to this video, this very important video, in a second. But a little bit later on in her testimony, didn't they ask her about when she finally came forward with her allegations that Sean Combs sexually assaulted her? And that timeline is very, very important. I know they said that she never revealed this to Cassie, and that was her close friend, and we'll talk about Cassie in a minute, but didn't they also give an idea of when she first came forward or didn't come forward to prosecutors and authorities about her allegations against Sean Combs?
Well, right. They were kind of talking about how she didn't disclose to the government in any of her interviews, because they pointed out that she had met with prosecutors and federal agents about 27, 28 different times. But it wasn't until June of 2024 that she actually disclosed in her meeting. And they were kind of trying to paint it as, oh, you didn't disclose this until you got a lawyer because you're hoping to get money out of this or possibly do a lawsuit after this, after testifying. And so as far as Mia disclosing to the federal government, it wasn't until June of last year. But even while on the stand, while she was kind of recalling just that, she was emphasizing a number of times on why she didn't disclose that she was sexually abused or sexually assaulted, because she said that she was scared, that she was terrified, that she was in shock, that she tried to forget that all of this had happened to her. And that kind of played into why she didn't disclose what had happened to her. And then the defense kind of pointing out, well, you wanted to keep working for Mr. Combs or for Diddy, and Mia was explaining that she didn't feel like she had a choice. And so they were kind of using, I guess, her words against her, where they were kind of bringing up, well, we could like rely on your therapy notes. And then there was a whole big objection. There was a whole big sidebar. The jury was instructed to disregard that. But it seemed like that's where kind of the angle was going a little bit from the defense, where I guess Mia had offered to turn over her therapy notes to kind of verify that she was sexually abused, sexually assaulted. But then there was kind of this whole hiccup with all of that. So we didn't see any of that. But as far as Mia being on the stand, she really was emphasizing that she didn't lie under any portion of her testimony. She was being truthful. She was being forthcoming, but according to the defense, they didn't necessarily believe that.
And talking about that, where they strike at portions of her credibility and when she came forward and that she doesn't have evidence of this abuse, there was something that was introduced into evidence today that wasn't introduced into evidence last week. It was this birthday video from 2013. I think that's the right year. Talk to us about what this video is, because it was a big point of controversy last week on Friday between the prosecution and the defense. First, lay it out for the viewers. What was the issue with this video? And it came into evidence today. What did it show?
Yeah, so this exhibit photo seemed like something that the defense really wanted to put into evidence, mainly because they were saying that the Mia who was on the stand when she had first started testifying under direct wasn't the Mia that they thought she was, that she was kind of playing this role for the jury. And so they said that this piece of evidence, this video particularly, really showed Mia for who she is. And so this was a present, and by present, not like a physical gift or anything like that, but it's just like a birthday video, a birthday shout out to Sean Combs from Mia. And so this was a present for Diddy's 44th birthday. And then you can see Mia in this video because we were able to see it. The problem was that surprisingly her face wasn't blurred, and I think there was kind of also a hiccup with that was supposed to be the redacted version. The redacted version wasn't shown, so we in the gallery saw her real face. So before the defense releases all their exhibits, likely this video will be blurred, showing her true face. But as far as what we saw Mia putting on lip gloss in this video, kind of preparing herself to be on camera, and it was kind of like funny and light and jest, that type of video. And so you see Mia, and she's talking pretty fast, where she's calling Diddy things like a big inspiration. She's blowing a kiss at him. She says happy birthday to him. And so again, this seemed like a piece of evidence that the defense really wanted in, because they say that's the true Mia. And even while being inside that courtroom, I will say that when Mia is reading some of her text exhibits or some old messages that she had sent to Diddy, that she was kind of saying it in that same voice that we saw in the video. So I felt like the defense was saying, okay, this is the real Mia. And so maybe we did see the real Mia at times, especially during the end of her direct, especially during her cross while she's reading those text messages. But I think the defense scored a win here by really getting this video in.
Yeah, it's again, it's an odd thing for somebody who claims they were tormented by Combs to speak so glowingly of him. And obviously someone's affect on the stand versus another video of how they speak, it all goes to credibility. And I think the larger question is, as we have this conversation about Mia, if the jury has questions about her credibility, does that affect the questions they may have about other witnesses and other alleged victims who take the stand? And whether, if they don't necessarily believe Mia, will they believe Cassie? I mean, this is a question we have in all different kinds of cases, but particularly sexual assault cases when there are multiple victims. You know, on one hand, the prosecution would say there's a strength in numbers by having multiple people testify, but if there's one break in the fence, if there's one break in the chain, does that affect everything else? It's a question that prosecutors have to be concerned about. And you know, when we were going into this trial, there was a question, oh, they're going to put on every single alleged victim who had something bad to say about Sean Combs. No, because if the jury thinks that there might be a weakness with some of these witnesses, it could affect the whole case for the prosecution. So they're very specific and with who they called and what are the actual alleged crimes that they're moving forward with. Now, talking about that, talking about two witnesses, I also understand Mia testified about Cassie. And was there something about tracking devices on Cassie's car?
Yeah, so Mia was explaining this while she was under cross. I think this was kind of towards after the lunch break. But yeah, it was kind of the first time that we had heard this in open court. I felt like I had heard Cassie talk about this during her direct testimony, but I might have been wrong. I might have just been kind of jumbling it in with the lawsuit. But she did point this out in her lawsuit, that Diddy would put tracking devices on her car to follow her around. But we didn't hear much more beyond that. But Cassie was kind of a focal point of Mia's cross-examination today, too. It took a good chunk out of it, where Brian Steele was asking Mia while she was on the stand, you described Cassie as your sister? And she said yes. You wouldn't lie to Cassie, would you? Mia had responded, I wouldn't lie to her about anything that I wasn't forced to lie about when I was working with Puffy. I couldn't tell her all of the truth. I had to uphold anything that he had told me. Mia was asked, was Cassie in love with Mr. Combs? And Mia responded, yeah, I believe back then. Well, you didn't tell Cassie that Diddy sexually assaulted you or that she should have gotten away. And Mia responded, I wasn't allowed to by Puffy. She was asked, you have nothing in writing that Mr. Combs told you that? And then there was an objection. The defense is told pretty much move on. And then I also thought what was interesting is while Brian Steele's cross-examining Mia, he refers to Cassie not as Miss Ventura, but as Miss Venture, and I felt like he was kind of leaving the A off a little bit. But Mia was asked, you told Miss Ventura, or Miss Venture, Diddy needed his brain rewired after lashing out, and then there was an objection. The government wanted a sidebar, and then that question was never really re-asked. But Mia was asked, do you remember telling Cassie that Diddy would throw tantrums like a child? Why would you stick up for him? And Mia responded, well, I was required to. It was the worst part about being put in the middle. Well, did you tell Cassie that she needed to stay with Mr. Combs? Mia responded, I didn't use the words. I remember covering for him because he was going to take her away. And Mia says that Diddy took her phone away, took Cassie's phone away, put trackers on her car, and that she was terrified of Diddy. And so Cassie was kind of a focal point, again, of a lot of Mia's cross-examination, even when she was asked about why she didn't report it in light of Me Too, and just how a bunch of powerful figures were essentially getting Me Too'd in a way. And Mia was asked, did you tell Cassie after reading her lawsuit that you were sexually abused? And Mia said that Cassie had called her afterward, but Mia didn't tell Cassie what happened to her. She said, I was deeply ashamed and wanted to die with it. That's when the defense is asking Mia just about the many meetings that she had had with prosecutors starting from January 5th of 2024, and whether or not she had disclosed to prosecutors in those initial meetings whether or not she was sexually assaulted. And again, she didn't disclose it until June of 2024. Then Mia was asked about Cassie's career and whether Cassie had more money being put into her career than any other bad boy artist. And Mia was like, I'm not sure how to necessarily answer that. Then Mia was asked about Michael B. Jordan once again. And so there were points where I think the defense was kind of talking about even kind of relating it to Kim Porter in ways where Cassie was jealous of Kim Porter. So I think even the defense was kind of pointing out that, you know, Cassie was jealous of Diddy's spending time with Kim Porter or other women, and Mia responded she only saw things on social media, like when we went to South Africa. She said, I don't remember, but I'm sure she wasn't thrilled. And the defense was kind of talking about, oh, Cassie wanted to be exclusive. And Mia responded, well, that's how he being Diddy, presented it to her. Did you tell Cassie that, or did Cassie tell you she was forced to have sex before you read her lawsuit? And did she tell you that she was being held against her will, doing these things against her will? There was an objection that was sustained. Well, did you tell the courts that we could look over your therapy notes? There's an objection, there's a sidebar. And so it really did feel like they were kind of talking about, kind of relating to why didn't you disclose this even after Cassie's lawsuit? If you're saying that Me Too was kind of the motivation for you not to report what had happened to you, why wasn't Cassie's lawsuit enough for you to kind of at least tell Cassie, or in some capacity tell other people, including possibly federal prosecutors and federal agents, that these types of things happen to you? So it was really kind of a little back and forth just as far as how it related to Cassie's career, how that related to Mia not disclosing that she was sexually assaulted, abused, or threatened while she had worked for Diddy. And so that was kind of the gist of the Cassie aspect of Mia's cross-examination.
And I understand the defense also highlighted the fact that Mia didn't mention this purported sexual assault or sexual assaults during a severance mediation, right? So towards when she was leaving her employment, I understand there was a conversation about, you know, money and litigation and taking illegal action against Sean Combs. What did we learn about that? And again, she didn't mention that to them, right?
Right. It's and so you're right, Jesse. During this kind of severance talk where she ended up getting a settlement for $400,000, however, only $200,000 of that went to her. The remaining portion went to her lawyers. But that was another thing the defense was kind of pointing out is, why didn't you disclose this when you were having these negotiations, when you were having this mediation? Why didn't you talk about it then? And she was also asked, you never called law enforcement about this, but you gave examples about getting a ticket, or that the LAPD had seen you with Mr. Combs inside the vehicle and they just let you go because the person who was riding with you was Mr. Combs. You didn't think about ever reporting this anonymously or going to a battered women's shelter. You never gave, and you only gave statements of admiration. And so the defense was really kind of pointing out again that even during these talks of severance, even during the settlement, even during the even during the meeting with federal prosecutors, that Mia didn't disclose that she was sexually abused or sexually tormented. That the defense was kind of painting this out as a new allegation that came forth in June of just last year, which notably is after Cassie's lawsuit, which is after the raids, but I think still even after the Intercontinental Hotel video was released too.
What didn't they come up with a different explanation for why she was fired? So if you're going into this case about whether she was retaliated against, or, you know, it goes into forced labor allegations, didn't they have another reasons for, or at least assert another reason for why her job with Sean Combs was terminated?
So Mia was asked what had happened after she had left working for Mr. Combs, aka Diddy, aka Puffy. We all know these different nicknames. But Mia had explained that after working with Diddy, she had worked for another high-profile celebrity, and this one we all know very well. Her name is Madonna. And Mia was explaining that she had worked for Madonna for about an 8-month period. And then Brian Steele had asked, well, didn't Mr. Combs assist you with getting this job? And Mia said, absolutely not. Brian Steele says, do you have any evidence that you were blacklisted? Mia said no, but that he took away the TV show that she was working on with ABC, that he took away a credit, that that he had promised her in this documentary. And then Brian still kind of lays it out. And before I say what he laid out, even before this line of questioning, we kind of knew where the direction of this cross-examination was going to go, mainly because Brian still kind of disclosed it outside of the presence of the jury, where he was kind of insinuating there was another reason that Mia might have been let go from her job, or that everything dissolved as far as her employment goes. And so he just laid it out there, this time in the presence of the jury, where he said, isn't it true that you were let go for being late all the time? But more importantly, isn't it true that you were let go for drinking all the time? And kind of insinuating that she was let go for another reason. And I think that kind of played into why they were using certain exhibit photos of her drinking Ciroc bottles or taking shots, just being a little more, I guess, not as professional as maybe we would expect just in a normal office setting, that type of thing. But if you're working with Diddy, I think it's a little different. But the defense was kind of trying to point it out that maybe you were let go because of your drinking. And Mia responded, absolutely not. And so she stayed firm on that. And again, pointing to the fact that she had said that she was being very truthful throughout her testimony. She wasn't lying. And so it's interesting that the defense kind of used that little piece against her, because I didn't know that that's where they were going to lead up to, but they definitely did today.
You know what's interesting about this? I'm curious how the prosecution questioned her, right? So redirect. And when I was hosting the lunchtime show on YouTube, I got so many questions about, you know, can we submit questions to the prosecution to kind of rehabilitate her testimony? Because they were very curious about how would the government try to essentially clean up her testimony when there were serious issues of her credibility raised. And you and I had talked about, by the way, there's been rumors that the jury has kind of been seizing on what Brian Steele has been saying, that they're kind of, you know, enamored with his cross-examination. We don't know if that's true or not. If you know something better than we do, that'd be great. But, you know, it becomes a question, how was the prosecution going to finish up their testimony with her? They called her as a witness. So two parts there. A, I guess I'll ask you, how is the jury responding to all of this back and forth with Brian Steele and Mia? And what did the prosecution do when they had an opportunity to question her?
Well, I think as far as the jury is concerned, from what I could see of them, I think they were very much in tune with the cross-examination and how it was going. But I think there was a point today where it was just like, when is too much too much? When is this witness going to be off the stand? When are we going to see somebody else? Because I think I had even heard somebody on the kind of in the press group that one of the jurors even closed their notebook because it just got so repetitive at some point. I did see some jurors kind of stretching. It might have been because it's a Monday. It might have been because they're tired because it's a Monday, and maybe it's not just because of the testimony, but who really knows necessarily? And from what I could see of them, I feel like they were holding on as much as they could. And maybe for them, the way that the direct went versus how the cross-examination went, maybe they were just kind of confused about the whole thing. But as far as prosecutors kind of rehoning everything in for the redirect, I didn't know kind of where it was going to go, how long it would take. But I think Madison Smizer tried to do what she could as far as kind of get back into what they were actually there for, what the kind of meat and substance of her testimony is. And so they first started asking her about the social media post. Did you post on social media as part of your job? Mia says yes. Then we see an exhibit photo of all of the descriptions that Mia has as far as being on the job and how it relates to Diddy's social media presence, or PD as it was called in this document. And so it was things like running PD's daily Twitter, monitoring what he tweets, those types of requirements. And so Mia was asked, were notes on his birthday a part of your job? Mia said yes. What happens if you didn't post something on his birthday? And Mia says, I would be in trouble. Did you say at the end of a certain post, like #revolt? And Mia said yes. Why didn't you post about the bad times? Mia said, because that's not what social media is for. And then Mia was asked, well, why did you keep a person who was abusing you all the time happy? And she said, when he was happy, I was safe. And then Mia said that the dynamics pretty much shifted quite often based on Diddy's mood, something that she had testified to earlier. And then she was asked, why didn't you remember his birthday as the anniversary of you being sexually assaulted? Mia says, well, there was no time to assess what happened. You just had to keep on working. And then Mia was asked, what happens if you don't follow the rules? Mia says, I would be punished. Why didn't you tell HR? Well, they fired Kayla, who was another assistant, for discussing Cassie's abuse, so they would fire me too. Mia was asked, what did Diddy call it when others went against him? And Mia said, betrayal. Mia said that he would make it out, he being Diddy, would make it out to be that she was like this crazy person. And then Mia was asked, why at the time was it the worst thing ever for you to be part of the dissolution of Revolt Films or fired? And Mia was explaining that that job was her entire world. And so Mia was asked questions on, were you worried about your physical safety? She said yes. Who abused you physically before? PD or Puff? Diddy? Mia was asked, you testified you met with the government 28 times. Why so much? And Mia said, to understand my story. I was learning what happened to me was wrong. Then Mia was asked, why were you terrified? And she had responded, I was terrified of Puff and the repercussions. Mia was asked, and I thought this was an interesting line of questioning towards the end, was, how do you feel about public speaking? And Mia responded that she was terrified. And that may explain why she kept looking down, why she didn't acknowledge the jury when they walked into the courtroom or even out of the courtroom, why she walked straight to the witness stand, always keeping her head down. And according to her, it might possibly be that she has this fear of public speaking, and on top of public speaking, having to disclose to an entire courtroom and to the person who sexually abused you that she was sexually abused. Now, she didn't say that, but that may have played a role into why she was terrified of public speaking. But then she was asked, how can you be terrified of public speaking but also do some comedy skits? And she responded that Puff made her do it. Have you ever been able to talk about the sexual assault without looking down? Again, looking down throughout her testimony, looking down whenever the jury enters and exits the courtroom. And Mia said, it's the worst thing I ever talked about in my life. And they end the line of questioning under the redirect because there was no recross. Why are you testifying? And Mia said that I can't look at my niece and my goddaughter in the eye. And she said a little bit more kind of to that effect of just she was doing it for her family. She wanted to be able to be truthful and forthcoming. And so that's where the that's where the redirect ended, and there was no recross after that, and Mia was finally let off the stand.
It would be amazing to know what the jury thinks at this point. You know, sometimes we cover trials, state trials, where the jury can actually submit questions to the witness, and that almost can kind of give you an idea of what are they taking away from the testimony? What do they need a little bit of a further explanation for? You can't do that here, but it would be very interesting to know if they could submit questions, what they would for Mia or any of the witnesses. So Mia finished her testimony, and then we heard the testimony of a new witness, a Sylvia Oken. Elizabeth, who's Sylvia Oken, and what did she testify today? Because I understand her testimony was pretty quick.
Yeah, it was very quick testimony. I was kind of wondering where this would all go to, but what we learned about Sylvia Oken is that she works at the Beverly Hills Hotel and has worked at the Beverly Hills Hotel for the last 17 years. So a pretty lengthy period where she is now the area director of sales and marketing, but previously she had worked as an entertainment sales director and an area director of sales. And so she was saying that she was pretty much familiar with just their hotel reservation system called Opera. And so Sylvia was asked, is the name on the profile always the real name? And Sylvia responded, no, our high-profile clients sometimes use aliases. So then I was like, okay, I can kind of see where this line of questioning might possibly go. So then we see an exhibit photo of a guest profile for Philip Pines. Now, I thought this name stood out to me. Why? Because Philip Pines is a former assistant of Diddy, but also he was somebody who's been vocal about Diddy's treatment of him in a documentary. And so I was like, okay, maybe they might call Phil Pines to the stand. And that's obviously a story for another day about just the allegations that Phil Pines had against Diddy, that type of thing. But as far as this particular exhibit goes, it was a guest profile for Philip Pines, but it wasn't necessarily for Philip Pines or Phil Pines. It was really for Sean Combs, and that was just an alias he used. But some of those dates go back even as early as 2012, where I don't believe Phil Pines was even working with Diddy in that type of capacity yet. But according to Sylvia Oken, while she was on the stand, whoever the last alias was entered in for is the alias that it changes all these like kind of reservations, even going back years in their opera system. Kind of within that program. And so Sylvia was explaining that guests can change their alias names if they request it. We see an exhibit of the hotel records showing the hotel stays, check in and out, room numbers, reservation notes, requests, addresses, phone numbers, emails, that type of thing. So then we see a zoomed in portion of that same exhibit where we see other accompanying guests, and the guest name that we had seen for this particular part was Cassandra Ventura, aka Cassie. And so then we see other requests that Diddy requested requested newspapers like the LA Times, New York Times to his reservation. But Sylvia was saying that he didn't use just Phil Pines as the alias for his hotel reservations, that he also used another alias, one that we know very well, that one being Frank Black. And so then we see another exhibit, this one of the method of payment. It was zoomed in, and that method of payment was for T. Fletcher at badboyworldwide.com, and that we believe to be Tony Fletcher. And then we saw that the payment was for an American Express under Sean Combs, but then we also saw the hotel bills for Mr. Pines, aka Diddy, for $6,700, which is a lot of money for a hotel stay, probably more than I would definitely pay for a hotel. But when you are as rich as famous as Diddy is, you can definitely pay for that, and that's probably just chump change to him. But we saw some particular charges, and those included that he had paid out for a doorman for 5 candles. We saw internet charges, telephone charges, private bar charges, but more specifically, a $300 charge for cleaning the drapes, because there was so much damage to the drapes that they had to get them specially cleaned outside of the normal capacity of cleaning. And then we see another hotel bill, this one for pay-per-view movies, private bars, but also oil damage for $500, because apparently this the Beverly Hills Hotel spent $500 just cleaning up, or deep cleaning up, this oil damage. And so all the history again went under Phil Pines' name, despite him probably not working in those early time periods, because we saw dates go back as early as like 2012 for this particular reservation. And so I was wondering, where is the cross-examination going to go? What is it going to be? It was by Tenny Garagos. It was very quick, and essentially she asked like 2 or 3 questions, but I think their main question was this the only name that these hotels were booked under? But they were booked under Cassie's name, but they were also booked under a person named Dominique Neal's name too. And so that was the gist of Sylvia Oken's testimony. She was in, she was out. It was very quick compared to some of the other witnesses that we've seen on the stand.
Yeah, look, so the prosecution has been trying to establish that there were freak-offs, and they have to establish that the freak-offs were essentially crimes, these coerced sexual episodes, evidence of sex trafficking, that they're essentially crime scenes. And they've called witnesses, including this individual, who just to establish the freak-offs happened. And I guess the defense is trying to say, well, were they, and by the way, it corroborates Cassie's testimony too about her description of these freak-offs, and it corroborates the testimony of alleged sex workers who say, you know, these are where the freak-offs happened or how they happened. But I think what the defense is trying to do is say, hey, Cassie was a willing participant. She helped to book them. She helped to set them up. So here's another example of a witness that is being used by both sides to prove their individual case, their individual narrative, as we see throughout the course of this case. Okay, so really interesting day today in testimony. I mean, every day I think is pretty interesting. Any indication about what we can expect tomorrow?
Yeah, well, we can expect a pretty busy day once again tomorrow. So according to the government, their next witness that they plan to call will be Eddie Garcia, who we already know got an immunity deal. And so I think what they're going to be talking about is that Intercontinental Hotel video again, because one of the next witnesses that they plan to call is Frank Piazza, who also, I guess, kind of helped with the forensics of the Intercontinental Hotel video and getting it to play at a speed that wasn't how it was presented for the CNN video. But then the next couple witnesses that I thought were interesting that they plan on calling is Bonna, who alleged in her lawsuit that Diddy had dangled her off the 17th story balcony. She was friends with Cassie. I believe she's still friends with Cassie to this day. But more importantly, by midweek, we could see another victim take the stand, and that being Jane. Now, again, Jane is testifying under a pseudonym, so we don't know her real identity. But as far as the government is concerned, they believe they could get Jane back on the stand either late Wednesday or Thursday morning.
Really important witness, because she not only makes up the overall racketeering charge, there is a specific sex trafficking charge. One of the specific counts is dedicated to her. The same way one of them was dedicated to Cassandra Ventura, it's also dedicated to Jane. And I think that's a very, very big moment in this trial that we're all going to be looking for. But every day in this case is important, because a racketeering case, a sex trafficking case, a transportation to engage in prostitution case, it's quite complicated, quite complex. There are a lot of different layers, and we're kind of seeing how the prosecution is building up to all of these, the building blocks, so to speak. Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much. As always, great reporting, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.